The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown apartment, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon gold and cold blue. The clock on the wall read 2:14 a.m. The only sound in the room, aside from the storm outside, was the scratch of my fountain pen against the heavy paper of my checkbook. $45,000 and 0 cents. I stared at the numbers until they seemed to float off the page. My hand hovered over the signature line. I was exactly 30 years old, sitting in the quiet, sterile luxury of an apartment I barely had time to enjoy, funding a fairy tale that wasn't mine. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the tight, hard knots of tension that had become my constant companions. The check was for Lakeside Manor, the final payment for my older sister Victoria's wedding venue. Victoria was 35, though if you asked my parents, she was a fragile, delicate bird who still needed the protective nest of their, and by extension my, resources. "You're the strong one, Clara," my mother Eleanor had told me just 3 days ago, her voice dripping with that practiced sweet honey that always masked a demand. "Victoria is so sensitive. She feels things so deeply. This wedding has her nerves frayed to the bone. You know how important it is that she makes a good impression on Liam's family. They are, well, they come from old money. We can't have them looking down on us." Us. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. When there was a bill to be paid, it was us. When there was a celebration, a family dinner, a photo op, it was just them. I signed the check, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. I had spent the last decade of my life building a career in financial management, working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing my 20s, my health, and any semblance of a personal life. I was a machine, an ATM wrapped in human skin, dispensing cash to cover my family's endless parade of emergencies. Victoria's rent when she wanted to find herself in an expensive loft downtown. My father Arthur's bad investment in a restaurant that folded in 6 months. My mother's cosmetic dentistry. It was a silent drain, a slow bleeding out of my resources, justified by the sacred untouchable word, family. But the wedding was the masterpiece of their manipulation. Liam, Victoria's fiancé, was a handsome, charismatic man who reportedly came from a long line of wealthy generational estates. My parents were terrified of looking inadequate. From the moment the engagement was announced, my father had taken me aside, his hand heavy on my shoulder, employing that commanding, authoritative tone he used to make me feel small. "Clara, this is the most important moment in your sister's life," Arthur had said, his eyes hard and expectant. "We need to show Liam's family that Victoria comes from stock just as impressive as theirs. You've done well for yourself. It's time to step up for the family name." And I did. I stepped up because underneath the exhaustion, the cynical financial advisor, there was still a little girl desperate for her parents' approval. I wanted to hear them say they were proud of me. I wanted to sit at the table and be looked at with the same glowing adoration they reserved for Victoria. So, I paid. I paid for the $12,000 Vera Wang gown. I paid for the imported white roses and blue hydrangeas. I paid for the 5-course catering menu, the string quartet, the open bar, and the hand-calligraphed invitations. In total, the wedding was pushing 6 figures. I folded the check, placed it in the envelope, and left it on the granite counter for my assistant to mail in the morning. I turned off the dim amber lamp over the kitchen island, letting the shadows swallow the room. In just 48 hours, Victoria would walk down the aisle. I told myself it would be worth it. I told myself that seeing my family happy would finally fill the hollow ache in my chest. I had no idea how wrong I was. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, the kind of perfect cloudless day that wedding planners pray for. The sunlight filtered through the ancient oak trees lining the driveway of Lakeside Manor, casting long, cinematic shadows across the manicured lawns. I pulled my car into the VIP parking area, turning off the ignition and taking a deep breath. I was wearing a tailored navy blue dress. It was elegant but understated, carefully chosen so as not to draw any attention away from the bride. My hair was styled in simple, soft waves. I carried a small velvet box in my purse, a pair of vintage pearl drop earrings I had spent weeks hunting down as a personal gift for Victoria, something borrowed in blue for her to wear down the aisle. As I walked toward the main estate, the sheer scale of what I had purchased hit me. Workers were putting the final touches on the massive floral archway where the vows would be exchanged. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and expensive perfume. Waiters in crisp white shirts were moving swiftly across the terrace, carrying trays of crystal champagne flutes. The string quartet was tuning their instruments in the corner of the garden, the sharp, elegant notes of a violin floating on the breeze. A young woman with a clipboard and a frantic expression intercepted me. "Are you at the groom's party? We're asking guests to wait in the conservatory until—" "I'm the bride's sister," I said quietly. "Clara, I'm looking for the bridal suite." The coordinator's face fell into an expression of profound confusion. She looked down at her clipboard, flipping through 3 pages of color-coded schedules. "The bride's sister? I'm sorry, I don't have you listed for the pre-ceremony photos or the bridal suite access. I only have Mr. and Mrs. Vance, the bridesmaids, and the groom's mother." A cold prickle of unease crawled up the back of my neck. "There must be a mistake. I'm Clara Vance. I stopped myself before I said, "I paid for all of this. Just point me to the suite, please." She hesitated, then pointed toward the grand sweeping staircase inside the main hall. "Second floor double oak doors at the end of the hall. But miss, they asked specifically not to be disturbed." "They won't mind me," I said, offering a tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. I climbed the velvet-carpeted stairs, the heavy silence of the upper hallway a stark contrast to the bustling activity below. As I approached the double oak doors, I could hear laughter. It was Victoria's high, musical laugh, accompanied by the soft, fawning tones of my mother and a voice I didn't recognize, likely Liam's mother. I paused with my hand over the brass doorknob. A memory flashed in my mind, unbidden and sharp. 2 months ago, the day of the dress fitting. I had transferred the funds to the bridal boutique that morning. I had cleared my schedule, hoping my mother would call me to come down, to sip champagne and watch my sister step out of the dressing room. I waited by my phone all day. Nothing. Finally, needing an excuse, I drove by the boutique on my way home from the office. Through the pristine glass window of the shop, I saw them. Victoria, radiant in the gown I had bought. My mother, dabbing tears from her eyes. And Liam's mother, holding a glass of champagne, smiling warmly. They looked like a perfect, complete picture. A picture that didn't have room for me. When I called my mother later that night, pretending I didn't know the fitting had happened, her voice had been smooth, unbothered. "Oh, Clara, we went this afternoon. We didn't want to bother you. You're always so stressed, so wrapped up in your numbers and spreadsheets. Victoria is very sensitive to energy right now. We didn't want your intense work aura to stress her out. You understand, don't you?" I had swallowed the hurt, just like I always did. "You understand, don't you?" The family motto. I pushed the memory away and turned the brass knob, pushing the heavy oak doors open. The bridal suite was bathed in glorious natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was a whirlwind of discarded garment bags, makeup brushes, and half-empty champagne bottles. In the center of it all stood Victoria. The dress was magnificent. Intricate lace hugged her bodice, flowing out into a sweeping train of silk and tulle. Her hair was swept up into an elaborate, flawless updo. She looked breathtaking. "Victoria," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. The laughter died instantly. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Victoria spun around, her smile vanishing so quickly it was as if she had taken off a mask. My mother, Eleanor, who was adjusting Victoria's veil, froze. She was wearing a stunning silver gown that I had also paid for. Her face paled, the color draining from her expertly rouged cheeks. "Clara," Eleanor breathed, her voice tight, completely devoid of the warmth a mother should have upon seeing her daughter. From the corner of the room, Liam's mother, a tall, imposing woman dripping in diamonds, looked at me with polite curiosity. "Oh, hello. I don't believe we've met." Before I could open my mouth, my father stepped out from the adjoining dressing room, adjusting his tuxedo tie. When he saw me, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. He didn't say hello. He didn't smile. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing my elbow with a grip that was entirely too hard. "Clara, what are you doing up here?" Arthur hissed, his voice low, a venomous whisper meant only for me. "I came to give Victoria her gift," I said, pulling my arm out of his grasp, holding my ground. I looked past him to my sister. "You look beautiful, Vic." Victoria didn't say thank you. She looked at our mother, her eyes wide and panicked, acting like a trapped animal. "Mom, you said she was coming later. You said she wouldn't be up here." "I am here," I said, the cold prickle of unease evolving into a deep, sickening dread in the pit of my stomach. It's my sister's wedding. Why wouldn't I be here? Eleanor plastered a painfully fake smile on her face and turned to Liam's mother. Margaret, dear, would you mind giving us a moment? Family business, you know how it is. Just some last-minute sisterly emotions. Margaret smiled politely, though her eyes were sharp and assessing. Of course, Eleanor. I'll go check on Liam. Victoria, darling, you look like a vision. She glided out of the room, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind her. The moment the latch clicked, the atmosphere in the room shattered. The fake smiles melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating hostility that took my breath away. Are you out of your mind coming in here right now? Arthur snapped, advancing on me. The cinematic light from the windows threw deep, harsh shadows across his face, making him look like a stranger. Excuse me? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I told you the schedule, Eleanor said, her voice dropping the sweet honey and adopting a sharp, frantic edge. You were supposed to arrive at 5:30 and take a seat in the back rows, not parade yourself into the bridal suite where Liam's mother is. I looked between the three of them, my father glaring at me with open anger, my mother wringing her hands in panic, my sister, the beautiful bride, looking at me with absolute, undisguised resentment. Take a seat in the back rows? I repeated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I'm the bride's sister. I paid for this suite. I paid for that dress. I paid for the tuxedo you're wearing, Dad. Why am I sitting in the back rows? Because this isn't about you, Victoria burst out, her voice shrill, the delicate illusion of the blushing bride completely gone. She took a step toward me, her face flushed with fury. It's always about you, isn't it, Clara? You always have to insert yourself. You always have to remind everyone how successful you are, how much money you make. I didn't say a word about money until you treated me like an intruder, I fired back, my own temper finally beginning to crack the ice of my composure. I came here to give you a pair of vintage earrings. I came here to be your sister. We don't need you to play the sister right now, Arthur growled, stepping between Victoria and me like I was a threat. Listen to me very carefully, Clara. Liam's family, they have expectations. They are society people. And, I challenged. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. And we told them that we were paying for this wedding. Arthur and I. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I stared at my mother, trying to process the magnitude of the lie. You what? Liam's parents are traditional, Eleanor hurried on, her eyes darting to the door as if terrified Margaret might be listening. They expect the bride's parents to host. If they knew that our 30-year-old daughter was funding the entire family, it would look pathetic. It would make us look like failures. Liam's father would never respect Arthur. So you lied to them, I stated, my voice eerily calm despite the roaring in my ears. We protected our family's dignity, Arthur corrected sharply. Something you wouldn't understand, seeing as you view everything as a transaction. The sheer audacity of the statement felt like a physical blow. I viewed things as a transaction? I, who had bled myself dry for years asking for nothing in return but a seat at their table? And what does that have to do with me sitting in the back? I asked, though the horrifying realization was already dawning on me. Victoria crossed her arms over her Vera Wang bodice. Because you can't keep your mouth shut, Clara. You have this attitude. You look at us like you own us. If you're mingling with Liam's family, if you're standing up there in the front row, they're going to ask questions. They're going to wonder why the spinster sister looks so smug. Spinster sister. I was 30. I was a director at a top financial firm, and to them I was just a bitter, arrogant ATM. We need you to leave, Arthur said. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I looked at my father. Leave the suite? Leave the venue, Victoria corrected, her chin tilting up in defiance. Mom is right. Your energy is wrong. You're resentful. I don't want you ruining my photos with your sour face, and I can't risk you getting a few drinks at the reception and telling Liam's parents that you wrote the checks. This is my day. My one perfect day. I will not let you ruin it. I stood there, surrounded by the opulent beauty that my sweat and tears had purchased. I looked at my mother, who refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to stare at the floor. I looked at my father, whose chest was puffed out, guarding his golden child. And I looked at Victoria, who wore my money on her back, and looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. You want me to leave, I said, making sure I understood perfectly. You want me to walk out the back door of the wedding I paid for, because my presence might expose your lies. Don't be dramatic, Clara. Eleanor sighed, playing the victim again. We just need you to go home. We'll tell Liam's family you had a sudden work emergency. It makes sense for you anyway. You can come over tomorrow and we'll show you the pictures. We appreciate what you've done, we really do, but you don't fit in here today. You don't fit in here. For 30 years, I had believed that if I just gave a little more, worked a little harder, wrote a slightly larger check, I would finally earn their love. I thought the transactions were a bridge to their hearts, but standing in that sunlit room, the bridge collapsed. I saw them not as the family I longed for, but as exactly what they were, parasites. They didn't love me. They despised me. They resented my success, even as they fed off it. They hated that they needed me, and so they punished me for it. I reached into my purse. Victoria's eyes flicked to my hands, a brief flash of greed crossing her face, perhaps thinking I was pulling out another envelope of cash, a final wedding day bonus. Instead, I pulled out the small velvet box containing the pearl earrings. I didn't hand them to her. I opened the box, looked at the lustrous vintage pearls that had cost me a week's salary, and then snapped the box shut. I dropped it back into my purse. Clara, Arthur warned, his tone dark. Don't make a scene. The service exit is down the hall. Go quietly. I didn't cry. That was the most surprising thing of all. I had cried 1,000 tears in my luxury apartment over these people. I had cried over missed birthdays, over unreturned phone calls, over the relentless pressure. But now, looking at their cold, calculating faces, the well of my grief instantly dried up, replaced by something entirely different. Something hard, something cold, something absolute. The cord was cut. The illusion was dead. All right, I said softly. My voice was completely steady. No tremble, no hesitation. My parents looked visibly relieved. Victoria let out a dramatic, breathy sigh, as if a great burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Thank you for understanding, Clara, Eleanor murmured, stepping forward as if to hug me. I took a step back, my eyes locking onto hers. The look on my face must have been terrifying because my mother froze mid-step, her arms dropping limply to her sides. I understand perfectly, Mother, I said. The word tasted metallic on my tongue. You're right. I don't fit in here. Enjoy your perfect day. I turned on my heel and walked out of the bridal suite. I didn't slam the heavy oak doors. I pulled them shut with a soft, definitive click. I walked down the velvet-carpeted stairs. I walked past the young coordinator who gave me a sympathetic, confused look. I walked past the towering floral arrangements of white roses and blue hydrangeas. I walked past the string quartet, who were now playing a hauntingly beautiful classical piece. I walked out the front doors of Lakeside Manor into the brilliant, cinematic sunshine. I got into my car, the leather seats hot against my skin. I didn't start the engine immediately. I sat in the silence of the cabin, staring at the grand estate. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded the ATM, keeping the cash while removing the inconvenient human attached to it. They thought the transaction was complete. I reached into the center console and pulled out my laptop. I opened it, the screen glowing brightly against the shadows of the car interior. I connected to the venue's Wi-Fi. I opened my master file for the wedding, the spreadsheet that contained every contract, every vendor contact, every billing agreement. Clara Vance. Every single document bore my name, my signature, my credit card on file for the incidental holds. My father had said I viewed everything as a transaction. He was about to find out exactly how a financial director handles a breach of contract. I picked up my cell phone. I didn't feel anger. Anger is hot, messy, and reckless. What I felt was clarity. Ice-cold, diamond-hard clarity. I dialed the first number on my spreadsheet. Lakeside Manor Events, this is Marcus. How can I help you? Marcus, hello. This is Clara Vance, the primary contract holder for the Vance Reynolds wedding today. Ah, Ms. Vance. Yes, everything is proceeding beautifully. The guests are beginning to arrive in the conservatory. Is there something you need? I looked out the windshield at the main doors of the estate, watching a group of wealthy, impeccably dressed guests hand their keys to the valet. Yes, Marcus, there's been a change of plans, I said, my voice smooth and professional. I am invoking the immediate cancellation clause in my contract. Section 4, paragraph B. I am withdrawing my financial guarantee for the event, effective immediately. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Ms. Vance? I'm sorry, did you say cancellation? The ceremony is in 45 minutes. I am aware of the time, Marcus. I am officially refusing payment for all outstanding balances, including the catering, the open bar, and the venue staffing. You are not authorized to serve a single drop of alcohol or a single plate of food on my account. Ma'am, if you do this, we will have to pull our staff. We will have to shut down the kitchens, the music. Shut it all down, Marcus, I commanded softly. Every service that bears my name. Stop the music. Clear the tables. The wedding is over. I hung up. I didn't wait to hear his response. I moved to the next number on my list. The florist. Then the rental company that supplied the chairs and the linens. Then the string quartet's booking agent. With every call, I savored a string. I dismantled the opulent fake world my parents had built on my back. I took away the flowers, the food, the music, the lights. I left them with nothing but the truth and the empty halls of an estate they couldn't afford. I closed my laptop, the fan humming softly in the quiet car. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, heading down the long oak-lined driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The first caterer's van was already pulling up to the service entrance to begin packing up the kitchen. I merged onto the highway, driving away from Lakeside Manor, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The drive back to the city was the quietest hour of my adult life. My phone, sitting in the passenger seat, vibrated relentlessly, a frantic, vibrating plastic brick of fury and panic. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening miles behind me. I pictured the catering staff, polite but unyielding, wheeling away towers of crab cakes and silver chafing dishes. I pictured the venue manager flipping the breaker on the ambient lighting, plunging the grand ballroom into harsh, fluorescent reality. I pictured Liam's society family standing in the sudden silence, whispering behind their hands, while my parents scrambled to explain why their supposedly bottomless bank account had suddenly bounced. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the silence wrapped around me like a heavy protective blanket. I locked the deadbolt, slipped off my heels, and poured myself a generous glass of Cabernet. Only then did I pick up my phone. 87 missed calls, 42 voicemails. I pressed play on this first one. It was my mother, Eleanor, her voice a hysterical, breathless shriek. "Clara, what did you do? The caterers are packing up. The manager says the card on file was revoked. You need to fix this right now. Liam's parents are looking at us like we're trash. Call me back immediately." The second voicemail was from Victoria. She was sobbing, the kind of deep, ugly crying she usually reserved for when she didn't get her way. "You monster! You ruined my life. I hate you. I will never forgive you for this. Do you hear me? You selfish, jealous, bitter." I deleted the rest without listening. I blocked their numbers. I blocked Liam's number. I blocked my extended family's numbers. 2 hours later, the intercom buzzer on my wall screamed to life. The concierge at the front desk of my high-security building sounded nervous. "Ms. Vance, your parents and your sister are in the lobby. They're causing quite a disturbance. They're demanding to be let up to your penthouse. Should I call building security?" "Yes, David," I said smoothly, taking a sip of my wine. "Please escort them off the premises. If they refuse to leave, call the police. They are not welcome here. Not today, not ever." I walked over to the digital security panel on my wall and pulled up the lobby camera feed. The camera was high definition, offering a crisp, top-down view of the marble foyer. There they were, the picture-perfect family. Victoria was still in her Vera Wang gown, though the train was visibly soiled from dragging across the city sidewalks, and her flawless updo was unraveling. My father's tuxedo jacket was off, his tie undone, his face a mottled, furious red as he jabbed a finger at the terrified young concierge. My mother was weeping onto a lobby sofa, her silver dress looking ridiculous against the modern leather furniture. They looked small. They looked pathetic. For 30 years, these three people had been the absolute center of my universe, the arbiters of my self-worth. They had held the power to crush my spirit with a single disappointed glance. But looking at them now, reduced to screaming at a receptionist because the ATM had finally swallowed their card, the illusion completely evaporated. I watched the building security guards approach them. I watched my father try to argue, puffing out his chest, only to shrink back when the head of security rested a hand on his radio to call the police. I watched them finally turn and walk out the revolving glass doors, humiliated, defeated, and banished. I turned off the monitor. It was over. But as a financial director, I knew that cutting the emotional cord was only the first step. When dealing with parasites, you don't just walk away. You audit the damage. You seal the vaults. I walked into my home office, a sleek room dominated by a massive mahogany desk and 3 high-resolution monitors. I booted up my system. If I was going to sever ties completely, I needed to ensure my financial walls were impenetrable. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with regarding Liam's family. My parents had been terrified of Liam's father, a man they claimed was a titan of generational wealth. It was the entire excuse they used to hide me in the shadows. I logged into a premium public records database I used for corporate due diligence. I typed in Liam Reynolds. I cross-referenced his parents, Richard and Margaret Reynolds. It took me less than 20 minutes of forensic digging to find the truth, and when I did, a sharp, humorless laugh escaped my lips. There was no generational wealth. There was no trust fund. Richard Reynolds had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 7 years ago after a spectacularly failed real estate venture. Their sprawling estate in the suburbs? It had 3 separate liens against it and was currently in the pre-foreclosure process. Liam himself had maxed out credit cards and a history of delinquent loan payments. The Reynolds family wasn't high society. They were drowning in debt, desperately treading water to keep up appearances. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Liam hadn't married Victoria out of pure, unadulterated love. He married her because he saw a family throwing a $100,000 wedding. He married her because my parents had bragged about their investments and their portfolio, painting themselves as eccentric millionaires. It was a mutual scam. 2 broke, image-obsessed families, both pretending to be rich, both banking on the other to save them from financial ruin. And sitting in the middle of it all, blindly writing the checks to keep the twin illusions alive, was me. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of disgust and dark amusement. The irony was poetic. When the dust settled, Victoria and Liam were going to realize they had both married empty bank accounts. But my amusement faded quickly as I moved to the next item on my checklist, securing my own assets. I logged into the major credit bureaus to place hard freezes on my social security number, a standard precaution to ensure my parents couldn't try to open any retaliatory credit cards in my name. I pulled my comprehensive credit report, scanning the familiar lines of my mortgage, my car loan, and my flawless payment history. And then my breath caught in my throat. There, sitting cleanly in the middle of the report, was an active account I did not recognize. Personal loan, unsecured. Principal amount, $100,000. Origination date, 3 months ago. My blood ran ice cold. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes tracing the details. The lender was a mid-tier regional bank, one I had never done business with. The status was active, with the first 3 monthly payments having been made on time. I clicked into the detailed view, my hands suddenly trembling. I traced the routing numbers for the initial deposit of the loan. The $100,000 had been wired directly into an account ending in 4402. I knew that account number. It was my parents' joint checking account, the one I routinely transferred money into to cover their emergencies. I sat back in my leather chair, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows in the dark office. 3 months ago, right around the time Victoria and Liam had announced they were looking to buy a house after the wedding. Right around the time my father had hinted that Liam's parents were gifting the couple a substantial sum, and how embarrassing it would be if the bride's family didn't match it. They hadn't just asked me for the money. They knew I would draw the line at $100,000 on top of a 6-figure wedding, so they bypassed the ATM completely. They had stolen my identity. They had forged my signature, used my pristine credit score, and taken out a massive fraudulent loan to use as Victoria's secret dowry, making themselves look like generous, wealthy benefactors to Liam's family. They had tethered me to a 6-figure debt without my knowledge, entirely comfortable with the fact that if they stopped making the monthly payments, the bank would come after me, seize my assets, and ruin the career I had bled for. The last lingering shred of daughterly guilt, the tiny, quiet voice that wondered if I had been too harsh by canceling the wedding, evaporated entirely. It was replaced by a cold, calculating fury that felt remarkably like steel. This was no longer a toxic family dynamic. This was grand larceny. This was a felony. They hadn't just broken my heart. They had tried to break my future. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I picked up my phone, scrolled past the hundreds of blocked notifications, and opened my contacts. I found the number for a man I had met at a corporate finance gala 2 years ago, Julian Hayes. Julian was a senior partner at one of the city's most ruthless litigation firms. He specialized in high-net-worth financial fraud, specifically asset recovery in cases of familial embezzlement. He was notoriously cold, breathtakingly expensive, and he never, ever lost. I left a brief voicemail. Within 10 minutes, my phone rang. "Clara Vance," Julian's voice came through the speaker, crisp, baritone, and awake, despite it being a Sunday morning. "I remember you. You handle the offshore accounts for the Sterling Group. To what do I owe the pleasure of a weekend call?" "I need your services, Julian," I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. "I've uncovered a $100,000 fraudulent loan taken out in my name. The perpetrators are my parents. I have the paper trail, the routing numbers, and the motive." There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the subtle shift in his breathing, the sound of a predator catching a scent. "Family fraud. It's always the messy ones. Are you prepared to press criminal charges, Clara? Because if you're looking to just scare them into paying you back, I'm not your guy." "I don't want to scare them," I replied softly, my eyes fixed on the forged loan on my monitor. "I want to ruin them. I want every cent back. I want the legal bindings severed, and I want them to face the absolute maximum consequences of the law. Can you see me tomorrow?" "My office, 8 a.m., Julian said. "Bring everything." Julian's office was on the 42nd floor, a sweeping expanse of glass, dark mahogany, and brushed steel. It looked less like a place of law and more like an executioner's chamber. Julian sat across from me, his bespoke suit immaculate, his sharp, dark eyes scanning the thick manila folder I had dropped on his desk. He didn't offer me a platitude. He didn't give me a sympathetic tilt of the head. He treated the situation exactly as it was, a financial war. "They were sloppy," Julian finally said, closing the folder and steepling his fingers. "They used your old address on the loan application to intercept the physical mail, but they routed the funds directly into an account with their names on it. The bank teller who notarized the forgery is likely a friend of your father's. I'll have an investigator look into that today. Proving fraud will be the easiest part of my week." "So we go to the police?" I asked, leaning forward. Julian shook his head slightly, a small, dangerous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The police are slow, Clara. A criminal investigation for identity theft can take months, sometimes years, to go to trial. During that time, your parents will play the victims. They will try to drag you through the mud, claim it was a misunderstanding, or worse, claim you authorized it verbally." "I have the proof," I insisted. "And you will get your justice," Julian assured me, his tone smooth as glass. "But I prefer to control the narrative. I prefer to amputate the limb before the patient even knows they're on the operating table. We need leverage to force a total, immediate surrender." "What kind of leverage?" Julian leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "We trap them. Right now they are panicked because you ruined the wedding. They are desperate for money, and they are desperate for you to fall back into your role as their savior. They think you are acting out of emotion. We are going to use their greed against them." He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and uncapped a heavy gold fountain pen. "We contact them," Julian continued. "We tell them you've retained counsel, not to sue them, but to formally separate your finances to protect your firm's reputation after the wedding incident. We tell them that as part of this severance, you are willing to sign over the title of the lakeside cabin you bought 3 years ago, or offer a final massive lump sum settlement to help Victoria start her new life." I stared at him. "You want me to offer them money?" "I want to offer them bait," Julian corrected. "Your parents are narcissists, Clara. Narcissists cannot resist a payout, and they cannot resist the opportunity to believe they have outsmarted you. If they think you are throwing money at them out of guilt for ruining the wedding, they will come running. We invite them here, to this office, to sign the settlement papers." I felt a cold thrill race down my spine as I began to see the architecture of his plan. "And what are they actually signing?" "They aren't signing anything," Julian said, leaning back in his chair. "We get them in a room, all of them. We let them sit down, confident and arrogant. And then we lock the door. We drop the $100,000 forgery on the table. We drop the criminal complaints, fully drafted and ready to be filed with the district attorney. We give them exactly 2 choices. They sign a legally binding admission of guilt and a restitution agreement that strips them of every asset they own to pay you back immediately. Or my paralegal hits send and the police arrest them before they reach the lobby. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. It was exactly what they deserved. They'll bring Victoria, I noted, my mind racing. And probably Liam. They'll want witnesses to my apology. Perfect, Julian said, his smile widening into something truly predatory. The more of an audience they have, the harder they will fall. Let Victoria and her new husband see exactly where their money comes from. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. For 10 years, I had let these people make me feel small. I had let them convince me that I was cold, unlovable, and only useful for the numbers in my bank account. They had taken my youth, my peace of mind, and finally, my name. Do it, I said, turning back to Julian. Set the meeting. Julian picked up his desk phone, pressing a single button. Sarah, draft a summons for Arthur and Eleanor Vance. Tell them Ms. Vance is prepared to discuss a final financial settlement regarding Victoria's marriage. Tell them it's extremely lucrative. And Sarah, book the glass conference room for Thursday at noon. He hung up the phone and looked at me, closing the file. Go home, Clara. Buy a new dress. Get some sleep. On Thursday, we burn their house down. Thursday morning arrived with brilliant, unapologetic sunshine. I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom, assessing my reflection. I wasn't wearing the muted navy dress I had worn to the wedding, the one designed to make me fade into the background. Today, I wore a sharply tailored bone-white blazer over a charcoal silk blouse, paired with a skirt that fit like armor. I clasped a heavy gold watch around my wrist. It was the armor of a woman who was no longer asking for a seat at the table. I owned the table. Julian's glass-walled conference room was an intimidating space. Suspended 42 floors above the city, it offered a panoramic view of the skyline. The long table was carved from a single slab of dark walnut, polished to a mirror finish. 4 leather chairs sat on one side. Julian and I sat on the other. At precisely 12 noon, the heavy glass doors swung open. My parents walked in first, followed by Victoria and Liam. The transformation from the screaming, humiliated people in my lobby 4 days ago to the arrogant quartet before me was almost impressive. My father, Arthur, had regained his puffed-out chest and authoritative stride. Eleanor carried a designer handbag that I had bought her for her birthday, wearing a look of rehearsed, sorrowful grace. Victoria looked impossibly smug. She clung to Liam's arm, projecting the image of a wealthy young bride inconvenienced by a peasant's tantrum. Liam wore a suit that looked expensive from a distance, but in the sharp, unforgiving light of the conference room, I could see the slight fraying at the cuffs. A man desperately maintaining an illusion. Clara, Arthur said, taking the seat directly across from me. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded like a disappointed principal who had finally corralled a delinquent student. I'm glad you came to your senses. Your mother has been sick with worry over your little breakdown. We're just relieved you're ready to make this right, sweetie. Eleanor chimed in, settling into her chair and folding her hands on the walnut surface. Family is family. We forgive you for the scene at the venue. We know how stressful your job is, but Victoria and Liam have had a terrible week, and we just want to put this behind us. Victoria didn't even look at me. She picked at an invisible speck of dust on her perfectly manicured nails. The honeymoon had to be postponed, she muttered, and Liam's parents were deeply offended. A simple apology isn't going to fix the social damage you caused, Clara. That is exactly why we are here. Julian's voice cut through the air, smooth, deep, and carrying an absolute, unquestionable authority. The family finally seemed to notice the man sitting beside me. Julian hadn't moved. He simply watched them with the detached fascination of a biologist examining insects under a microscope. I am Julian Hayes. I represent Ms. Vance in all matters regarding her personal and financial severance from this family. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. My client is prepared to execute a final arrangement today, one that will permanently resolve her obligations to you. Arthur smiled, a greasy, triumphant expression. He glanced at Victoria, giving her a subtle nod that screamed, "I told you so." They honestly believed I had brought them to a high-rise law firm to hand over the keys to my lakeside cabin, or a massive check to soothe my guilty conscience. Well, Mr. Hayes, Arthur said, leaning back and crossing his arms. We aren't unreasonable people. Clara made a catastrophic mistake that humiliated this family. If she is offering the lakeside property to Victoria as restitution to help the newlyweds secure their future, we are willing to sign the non-disclosure agreements and move on. Actually, Julian said, picking up the thick manila folder resting in front of him, we are here to discuss a different piece of property, namely a $100,000 unsecured personal loan. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. Arthur's smug smile vanished, replaced by a sudden chalky pallor. Eleanor's hands twitched, her knuckles turning white where she gripped her designer bag. Victoria just looked confused. Julian opened the folder with deliberate slowness. He didn't hand them a settlement agreement. He slid 3 crisp, printed documents across the polished walnut. They stopped perfectly in front of my father. Document A, Julian narrated, his voice dangerously quiet. A loan application filed 3 months ago, bearing my client's name, social security number, and a spectacularly clumsy forgery of her signature. Document B, the IP address log from the bank, showing the application was submitted from the desktop computer located in your living room. Document C, the wire transfer receipt, showing the $100,000 was deposited directly into a joint checking account ending in 4402, an account belonging to Arthur and Eleanor Vance. The silence in the conference room was absolute. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic ticking of my gold watch. I watched my parents. I watched the people who had told me I didn't fit in at the wedding. Arthur opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Eleanor stared at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. There has been a misunderstanding," Arthur finally stammered, sweat breaking out across his forehead. The authoritative patriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified old man. "Clara, you told us to take care of the wedding overflow. We thought you meant—" "Do not insult my intelligence, Mr. Vance," Julian interrupted, his tone snapping like a whip. "And do not speak to my client. You committed identity theft. You committed wire fraud. You forged financial documents to secure a 6-figure sum to use as a secret dowry, knowing the liability would fall entirely on your daughter." Victoria leaned forward, her eyes darting frantically between the documents and our parents. "Mom? Dad? What is he talking about? What loan? You said that money was your savings. You said you were gifting us the down payment for the estate." "Keep quiet, Victoria," Arthur snapped, panic bleeding into his voice. He looked back at Julian. "Listen, Mr. Hayes, this is a private family matter. Clara, tell him. We can sort this out. We'll pay the monthly installments. You won't have to lift a finger." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of any warmth. "You don't have the money to pay the installments, Arthur. You never did. You planned to make 3 payments so the bank wouldn't immediately flag it as fraud, and then you were going to default. You were going to let them come after my accounts. You were going to let me burn." "Clara, please," Eleanor whimpered, real tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of a cornered animal. "We did it for your sister, Liam's family. They have standards. We couldn't let them know we were struggling. You have so much, Clara. Why do you have to be so cruel?" "Cruel?" I repeated softly. I leaned forward, looking my mother dead in the eyes. "You stole my name. You stole my future. And you did it so you could pretend to be something you're not for a man who is exactly as fake as you are." Liam, who had been sitting in shocked silence, suddenly sat up straight. His handsome face twisted into a scowl of indignation. "Excuse me? Watch how you speak to me, my family. Your family is broke, Liam." I cut him off, my voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. The room went dead silent again. Liam's jaw clenched. Victoria snapped her head to look at her new husband. "What?" Victoria breathed. I didn't break eye contact with Liam. I opened a sleek blue folder of my own. Richard Reynolds. Chapter 11 bankruptcy filed 7 years ago. 3 active liens on the Westlake estate. Your credit cards are maxed out, Liam, and your car is 2 months behind on payments. You aren't old money, you're just old debt. I slid the bankruptcy records across the table. Victoria snatched them up, her eyes scanning the highlighted sections. Her face went from pale to a mottled, furious red. "Liam?" Victoria's voice trembled. "Liam, what is this? You told me your trust fund unlocked when we got married. You told me your parents were buying us the house in the Hamptons." Liam's facade completely crumbled. He looked at the documents, then glared at my parents with pure, unadulterated venom. "You told me you were wealthy. You told me Victoria was the heir to a massive real estate portfolio. You threw a $100,000 wedding. I threw the wedding, I corrected him, my voice echoing coldly off the glass walls. And I canceled it, because you are all parasites feeding off a corpse that finally woke up. The realization hit the room like a bomb. The double scam was laid bare under the fluorescent lights. Liam had married Victoria to gain access to a fortune that didn't exist. My parents had stolen from me to buy Victoria a wealthy husband who was actually bankrupt. They had all lied, manipulated, and clawed at each other, creating a massive, hollow illusion built entirely on my stolen credit. "You lied to me!" Victoria screamed, turning on Liam, her fists clenching. "You're broke! I married a broke loser!" "You're a fraud!" Liam shouted back, standing up so fast his chair crashed into the glass wall behind him. He pointed a shaking finger at Arthur and Eleanor. "Your family is going to prison. You think I'm staying chained to this? I'm calling my lawyer right now. I'm getting an annulment. We haven't even filed the marriage certificate yet. You people are insane." Liam didn't look back. He stormed out of the conference room, the heavy glass doors slamming shut behind him. Victoria let out a guttural scream of absolute despair. Her perfect, manicured life had evaporated in the span of 5 minutes. She turned her fury toward the only targets left. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked at our parents, tears ruining her flawless makeup. "You ruined my life. You forged documents? Are you stupid? You made me look like a fool in front of him." Eleanor reached out, crying hysterically. "Victoria, honey, we did it for you. We wanted you to have the best." "Don't touch me," Victoria spat, pulling away as if her mother were diseased. I watched them tear each other apart. 10 years ago, this scene would have broken my heart. I would have tried to fix it. I would have reached for my checkbook to smooth over the cracks. But today, looking at the wreckage of their own making, I felt nothing but a profound, sweeping sense of peace. Julian cleared his throat. It was a subtle sound, but it instantly commanded the room. The screaming stopped. Arthur and Eleanor looked at the lawyer with wide, terrified eyes. "Now that the domestic disputes are out of the way," Julian said, pulling a final document from his folder, "let us discuss your options, Mr. and Mrs. Vance." He slid a heavy legal contract across the table, along with a pen. "This is a legally binding confession to the forgery and wire fraud," Julian explained, his tone conversational, but laced with lethal intent. "Coupled with it is a restitution agreement. You will liquidate your 401k accounts. You will sign over the deed to your primary residence. You will transfer the remaining balance of the stolen funds back to my client immediately. You will strip yourselves to the studs to pay off this $100,000 debt, plus legal fees, by the end of business today. Arthur stared at the paper, his hands shaking violently. "If we liquidate the house, we'll have nothing. Where will we live?" "That is entirely your problem," Julian said coldly. "However, if you do not sign that paper in the next 60 seconds, my paralegal will forward the evidence to the district attorney's office. You will be arrested for felony identity theft and grand larceny. You will serve a minimum of 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. Your choice, Arthur. Sign the paper or hold out your wrists for the cuffs." I didn't stay to watch him sign. I didn't need to. I knew the cowardice that lived in his bones. He would sign away the house and his retirement to save himself from a prison cell. They would be left with nothing. Victoria was left with no husband, no dowry, and no wealthy parents to fall back on. I turned and walked out of the glass conference room. The heavy doors sealed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my mother's weeping and my sister's furious accusations. I walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway of the firm. I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby. As the steel doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal. I looked tired, yes. The dark circles under my eyes wouldn't vanish overnight, but the suffocating weight that had rested on my chest for 10 years was gone. When I walked out of the high-rise building and onto the bustling city street, the midday sun hit my face. It was warm, bright, and completely blinding. I took a deep breath of the city air. I had lost a family, but I had finally found myself. The transaction was complete, the debt was settled, and for the rest of my life, my name belonged only to me. A year is a strange measurement of time. In the world of finance, it's 4 quarters, a cycle of fiscal reports and projected growths. But in the architecture of a human life, a single year can be the difference between a prison and a sanctuary. It was mid-October, exactly 14 months since the wedding that never happened. I was standing on the wraparound wooden porch of my lakeside cabin, a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp, earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. The lake stretched out before me, a perfect mirror reflecting the fiery gold and burnt orange of the autumn trees. I was wearing a thick, oversized wool sweater and faded denim jeans. No tailored blazers, no heavy gold watch. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the wooden dock and the distant, lonely call of a loon. It had taken Julian Hayes exactly 6 months to systematically dismantle the Vance family's financial ecosystem. He hadn't been bluffing in that conference room. Faced with the reality of a federal prison sentence, Arthur and Eleanor had capitulated entirely. The legal process was a cold, brutal unspooling of their lifelong arrogance. Their 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, the house I had grown up in, the house where I was always treated like a ghost, was sold in a rapid, short sale. The equity they had desperately clung to was swallowed by the real estate fees and the immediate repayment of the forged $100,000 loan. Arthur's 401k, a modest fund he had always boasted about as if it rivaled a Fortune 500 CEO's package, was liquidated to cover Julian's exorbitant legal fees and the penalties levied by the bank. They were left with a few $1,000s and the clothes they could pack into their sedans. I didn't attend the closing of their house. I didn't oversee the liquidation. I had signed a power of attorney over to Julian, allowing him to act as my proxy. I didn't want to see their tears. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I had spent 30 years drowning in their manufactured crises, and I was finally learning how to swim away. Through the quiet whispers of the city's legal and social circles, and occasionally through Julian's dry, factual updates, I learned of their new reality. My parents had been forced to move into a cramped 1-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The building had peeling paint, no elevator, and definitely no space to host the imaginary high society friends Eleanor had spent decades trying to impress. Arthur, a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of being a wealthy patriarch, was now working as a greeter at a big-box hardware store. At 64 years old, his days of pretending to be a titan of industry were reduced to wearing a polyester vest and handing out shopping carts. Eleanor had taken a part-time job answering phones at a local dental clinic. The designer handbags and silver gowns were gone, sold to luxury consignment shops just to keep the lights on and buy groceries. But the hardest fall of all belonged to Victoria. Liam's annulment had gone through with lightning speed. The moment the ink was dry on the paperwork proving my parents were broke felons, Liam had completely ghosted her, retreating into his own family's sinking ship. Victoria was left entirely alone, a bride without a groom, a golden child without the gold. Without my parents' subsidized rent, and certainly without my blank checks, she had been evicted from her downtown loft. The last I heard, she was renting a tiny, windowless studio apartment above a noisy 24-hour laundromat. The woman who had worn a $12,000 Vera Wang gown and demanded I leave her venue was now working 40 hours a week at a mid-tier department store, standing on her feet all day selling the same luxury perfumes she used to hoard. I took a sip of my coffee, watching a single golden leaf detach from an oak tree and drift lazily down to the surface of the lake. I didn't feel a wicked sense of triumph. There was no villainous laughter, no gloating. What I felt was a profound, quiet sadness for the absolute waste of it all. If they had just loved me, if they had just seen me as a daughter instead of a bank, we could have shared the view from this porch. We could have had Thanksgiving dinners around the large oak table inside. They could have had a comfortable retirement, and Victoria could have had a sister who would move mountains for her. They had sacrificed everything real for the sake of a cheap illusion. A sudden crunch of gravel in the driveway pulled me from my thoughts. My cabin was located at the end of a private, unpaved road. Visitors were incredibly rare, mostly just the local postman or the firewood delivery truck. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and walked to the corner of the deck, looking toward the driveway. A beaten-up 10-year-old sedan had just shifted into park. The engine coughed and sputtered before finally dying out. The driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out. For a moment I didn't recognize her. She was wearing cheap dark wash jeans and a faded gray peacoat that looked a size too big. Her hair, once a masterpiece of expensive salon highlights and blowouts, was pulled back into a messy, unkempt ponytail. She looked exhausted. She looked 10 years older than 36. It was Victoria. She stood by the car for a long moment, looking up at the cabin. She looked small against the towering pines. When she finally saw me standing on the porch, she flinched, her shoulders drawing up toward her ears as if expecting me to shout at her. I didn't shout. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, waiting. Slowly, hesitantly, Victoria walked up the gravel path. She stopped at the bottom of the wooden stairs leading up to the porch. She didn't try to climb them. It was a physical boundary she seemed terrified to cross. "Hi, Clara," she said. Her voice was raspy, stripped of the arrogant, musical lilt she used to employ. "Victoria," I replied, my voice perfectly neutral. "How did you find this place? The deed is registered under an LLC. I asked Julian Hayes," she admitted, looking down at her scuffed boots. "He wouldn't tell me at first. I had to go to his office 3 times. I think he finally gave me the address just to get rid of me. He told me that if I harassed you, he would slap me with a restraining order so fast my head would spin." I couldn't help a microscopic smile. Typical Julian. "And are you here to harass me?" "No," Victoria said quickly, her head snapping up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, carrying dark, heavy bags beneath them. "No, Clara, I promise." We stared at each other. The silence stretched out, filled only by the wind rustling the dry autumn leaves. She looked so entirely broken, a shell of the golden child who had demanded I leave her wedding suite. "Mom and Dad are struggling," Victoria finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Dad's knees are giving out from standing all day at the store. Mom cries every night. They can barely afford the heating bill in their apartment, and winter is coming." There it was, the hook. The familiar, guilt-inducing narrative designed to pull the ATM back online. A year ago, those words would have sent me into a panic. I would have instantly reached for my phone to wire a few $1,000s to their account, desperate to fix their pain, desperate to be the hero they never thanked. Today, the words fell harmlessly against the armor I had built around my heart. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said calmly. "It sounds like a difficult situation." Victoria blinked, clearly thrown by my lack of reaction. "Clara, they're old. They made a terrible mistake, but they've paid for it. They lost the house. They lost everything." "They didn't make a mistake, Victoria," I corrected her, my tone gentle but unyielding. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a utility bill. A mistake is arriving late to dinner. Forging your daughter's signature to steal $100,000 is a calculated, deliberate felony. They didn't lose everything. They surrendered it to avoid federal prison." Victoria swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. She wrapped her arms around her thin frame, shivering slightly in the crisp air. "I know. I know what they did. And I know what I did. I was awful to you, Clara. My whole life. I was awful. I let them treat you like dirt because it benefited me. I was jealous of you. You were always so smart, so capable. I was terrified that if I didn't keep you pushed down, everyone would realize how useless I actually was." It was the most honest thing my sister had ever said in her entire life. It took my breath away for a fraction of a second. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the agonizing pain of a woman who had finally been forced to look in the mirror. "I'm sorry," Victoria choked out, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. "I am so, so sorry, Clara, for the wedding, for the money, for never being a sister to you. I don't want a check. I don't want you to pay Mom and Dad's heating bill. I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that you were right. About all of it." I leaned against the wooden railing, looking down at my older sister. I searched my heart for anger, for the searing resentment that had fueled my actions in Julian's conference room. It wasn't there. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only a quiet, fertile ash. "I appreciate your apology, Victoria," I said quietly. "I know how much it must have cost your pride to drive out here and say it." She let out a wet, broken laugh. "I don't have any pride left, Clara." "I forgive you," I said. The words hung in the air. They weren't a dramatic declaration. They were a simple, factual statement. I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. I was refusing to carry the heavy, toxic baggage of hating them for the rest of my life. Victoria's eyes widened. A desperate, fragile hope blossomed on her face. She took a half step toward the stairs. "You do? Clara, does that mean... Could we try again? Could we start over? Just you and me. We could get coffee. I could show you my apartment. It's terrible, but it's mine." I looked at the hope in her eyes, and I felt a twinge of genuine sorrow for what I had to do next. But healing requires boundaries, and my sanctuary was finally secure. "No, Victoria," I said, my voice soft, but carrying the weight of absolute finality. Her foot froze on the bottom step. The hope shattered, replaced by a devastating confusion. "But you just said you forgave me." "I did," I replied. "I forgive you for the past. I am letting go of the anger. But forgiveness does not equal access. Clara, you are my sister, Victoria, and a part of me will always wish things had been different," I continued, looking out at the calm, glassy surface of the lake. "But you are also unsafe for me. Our parents are unsafe for me. The dynamic we share is poison, and I spent 30 years drinking it. I'm clean now. I can't let you back into my life because letting you in means letting the chaos, the guilt, and the manipulation back in." "I've changed," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I swear to you, I've changed." "Maybe you have," I said gently. "And if you have, I am genuinely happy for you. I hope you build a beautiful, honest life for yourself. I hope Mom and Dad find peace in their new reality, but you will have to do it without me." I stepped back from the railing. "I wish you the best, Victoria. Please don't come back here again." She stood there for a long time. I didn't turn away. I held her gaze, offering no anger, no malice, just an impenetrable wall of self-respect. Finally, the fight drained completely out of her. She looked down at the gravel, gave a slow, defeated nod, and turned around. I watched her walk back to her beaten-up sedan. I watched her struggle to get the engine to turn over. When the car finally started, she slowly backed down the driveway, the tires crunching against the rocks, until the car disappeared around the bend of the pine trees. The silence of the woods rushed back in, filling the space she had left behind. I walked back to the small patio table and picked up my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. A few hours later, the sun began to set, painting the sky in violent, beautiful strokes of violet, crimson, and gold. The lake caught the colors, transforming the water into a sea of liquid fire. I wrapped my sweater tighter around myself, feeling the chill of the approaching evening. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Julian. "Just finalized the quarterly reports for your portfolio. The sterling accounts are up 8%, and I received confirmation that Arthur Vance's final restitution payment cleared the escrow account. The file is officially closed. Have a good weekend, Clara." I typed a quick reply. "Thank you, Julian. See you on Monday." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The file was closed. The ledger was balanced. The transaction, truly and finally, was complete. I looked back out at the sunset. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about the future. I wasn't dreading the next phone call, the next crisis, the next demand for my soul or my savings. I was exactly where I wanted to be, standing on the porch of a home I had bought with my own hard work, entirely alone, and perfectly, completely whole. I took a deep breath of the cold autumn air, smiled, and went inside.